Hey everyone, welcome. My name is Jason Harris. I am an evangelist here at Panoply. I have the pleasure of being joined by some guests who I will introduce in a second, but we wanted to welcome everyone to today's webinar on unlocking growth by unlocking data. We're going to focus on a customer story. We have Brian Ritchie, who is the director of growth at AgriWebb, and how he built an analytics stack using Panoply and Chartio in order to use data to fuel his SaaS company's growth. So let's talk about a few logistics. At any time, if you would like to ask a question to our panel, and it doesn't matter if the question is for Panoply, Chartio, or for Brian himself, go ahead and use the GoToWebinar questions facility. I will pose your questions to our expert panel either in real time or at the very end. We do have a dedicated Q&A period at the very end of the presentation. So go ahead, don't wait to ask your question. Go ahead and pose it whenever you need to. And also, if you're having any technical difficulties or you're having issues hearing us or whatever the case might be, go ahead and air your concern using the GoToWebinar questions facility to make that need be known. So who do we have on the panel today? We have a few gentlemen. Brian Ritchie is the director of growth at AgriWebb. He'll be joining us here in a second. I'm Jason. I'm the director of evangelism here at Panoply. We have Aaron Aahini, who is the senior data advisor at Chartio. And we have Skylar Shasky, who is one of our data architects at Panoply. Aaron and Skylar have a really fun role. They get to ensure that Chartio and Panoply customers are successfully using data, successfully using our products, and can be sure that they are using the products in the most meaningful way for your specific situation, your specific data stack, your specific organization's needs. We like to lead off this webinar by talking about analytic agility and how it is, according to Gartner, the ability to use business intelligence to be fast, responsive, flexible, and adaptable. And that kind of shapes the conversation about how Brian is able to use data to fuel growth at AgriWebb, and it's all about analytic and data agility. But first, let's talk about the products we're going to be kind of going over real quick. We're talking about Panoply and we're talking about Chartio. So Panoply is a smart data warehouse. There are 4 steps to enable business intelligence in your organization. There's data collection, there's storage, there's querying that data, and then there's visualizing it and creating dashboards so that you can share data across your organization. Panoply easily handles the first 3 of those columns. In terms of data collection, we have 150 plus data collection facilities. It's APIs as we connect to databases, we connect to files. So it doesn't matter if it's Salesforce data, Google Ads data, Google Analytics, Twitter ads, whatever. You can bring it all into Panoply so that you create human readable tables, and they are stored within our cloud data warehouse. And then we are always optimizing query performance. We have an AI engine that is monitoring the storage to make sure that your storage is happening in the most concise and clear way. Our AI is optimizing queries. We have a thing called automatic query materialization that if you are running the same query over and over again, our AI engine will see that and will commit that to memory so that everything is super fast. And so therefore, when you do visualize your data, your queries will run super fast and your visualizations will load. And even if you're doing complex queries across data sets, as long as it's all within Panoply, your performance is going to be top notch. And Aaron, did you want to talk about visualization?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jason. And setting up that clean data model on Panoply side is definitely essential to getting these insights faster on the BI or the visualization end. So within Chartio, using our visual SQL feature, using our drag and drop, it's easy to gain these insights within minutes, so that instead of waiting for a data team, waiting for that data analyst to get back to you after a day or a week, you can get to that question and answer these questions right away. Merging data across different data sets, different schemas, and using our data pipeline to add additional kind of query manipulation, add columns, and additional steps there.
And the beautiful thing about this cloud data stack, so Normally, you would have to go out and buy Panoply. You'd have to buy Chartio separately. But because two partners have come together, you don't have to do that. Everything works in a very seamless manner. In terms of data collection and integration, one thing that Panoply does really well is we use AI across the spectrum to be sure that data is brought in, it's queried quickly, and it's delivered very fast. So like I said, we have 100 plus data integrations. If there's an integration that we don't have, we partner with companies like Stitch, who's actually the third member of the Automatic Cloud Data Stack, to bring services, databases, and files all in one location so that you can query, and that we help make Chartio lightning fast with our query optimization engine to identify the queries that you're doing most quickly and optimize them for performance. Aaron, over to you.
And on the Chartio side of things, our mission to join people on data is kind of twofold there. One is ease of use, and the second is time to value. So our mission is to, like I said, enable everyone to visualize their data. So setting up that clean schema, setting up that clean data model across different teams is definitely essential, and it'll allow you to gain those insights faster. As you can see from this metric here, just quickly dragging and dropping different columns into measures and dimensions, merging those across different data sets, different data sources will definitely allow you to not only pull the data and analyze the data you need, but also make the decisions faster, for your growth team, for your sales team.
Awesome. And one thing that we do like to brag about is all partners involved in the Automatic Cloud Data Stack, including Chartio and Panoply, are AWS competency partners. So we're built on proven technology so that we can deliver really quick results for folks like Mr. Brian Ritchie, who we will introduce now. So Brian, take it over and just let me know when you want me to do it with the slides.
Cool. All right, thank you guys, and thanks again for having me today, and thanks for all the attendees who are on the call, and anyone else who's going to review this. I am Brian, and I'm fortunate to be leading growth at AgriWebb. And as a company, we have a sort of a grand vision or a grand mission statement there, which is to deliver the digital future of agriculture. And I'm going to dig in a little bit on how we approach growth as a function of that, and subsequently how data plays a big role. So really quickly about me, obviously had kind of a Doogie Howser beginning and started very, very young with software engineering, and then continued on to actuarial math and econ. But really, have just been focused on a lot of different industries and a lot of different size of companies really across my history. But have been fortunate to now actually join AgriWebb and sort of get them to where they need to be. Now, what I'll do is I'll focus now and go into a little bit more about AgriWebb as a whole, and that'll be on the next slide, Jason, if that's okay. Cool. And so this is a little bit on AgriWebb. So what is AgriWebb? AgriWebb is a AgTech SaaS company. So we provide farm management software that is literally used by farmers on a daily basis. The cool part about it is that we actually focus not on all the the fancier part of the day-to-day operation. We focus on just and started focusing purely on just simplifying their daily record keeping. And so really, if they're out in the paddock and out in the fields, and there's no internet, and they just have their phone or tablet or whatever that's on them, we and our app works offline, gets them to still record anything that's happening with the animals, anything that's happening with the treatments, the paddocks, the pastures, and so on and so forth, and have that record sync back into both the app and also the portal online that gives them kind of an overview of their farm performance, not just on the day-to-day, but on a sort of a timeline or time series kind of basis. It's a very young company from a SaaS perspective, but we're growing really, really fast. We're currently managing over, I think at this point, over 12% of the Australia national livestock. And obviously, we're now in about 8 countries globally, and we're thinking of expansion very, very carefully, but obviously very focused on certain specific key areas. We like to think of ourselves, or at least what people have actually called us as well, and has led us to think that this way, is we are kind of pioneering in some ways, because while we can sort of broadly paint agriculture and agricultural technology as a function of that, in a very, very sort of new and early phase, a lot of the effort has really been focused on cropping. And there's not as much effort or technology that's focused on livestock, and we are really one of the first few in the world to truly unify livestock management across that supply chain, which then leads to that whole delivering of the digital future mission that we're kind of thinking on about, right? So we actually focus quite heavily on empowering and enabling the day-to-day farmer, but having them get more data-driven at the core of it, right? So having them actually look at their own operation in a much more data-oriented manner, and subsequently, bring that maturity curve up, which is something we're going to be talking about with regards to Panoply and Chartio. So Jason, if you get trouble with the next slide. Cool. So we'll start all the way at the top, but I won't delve too much here. There's lots of things that has been said about growth. Obviously, these are fairly prominent names in the industry that has said that growth is really sort of a summary combination of a very management or sort of a cross-functional operation that looks at not just the business side of the company, but also the technical side and subsequently products and services that deal across the stack. But what I'd really like to think about in terms of growth is, a very simplified view, which is we can think of it as 4 customer segments. And if you think about it on the next slide, we can visualize this and say, that there are really 4 users, 4 types of users when you think about it, right? Like who interact with your business or your service or your product. And really, the goal here is to really sort of quickly classify them in terms of, just engagement, not just necessarily whether they're paid customers or not, but just users in general, And if they have been engaged and they're actively engaged, they were actively engaged and not anymore, not at all engaged, or, but and the final set of users, which is this nice orange spot in the middle, which is they did engage, but then they stopped, which is kind of a weird, like odd behavior. And what growth really is something that is quite simple, despite all the fancy terms that the industry has wrapped around it. Growth is really the changing of these cohorts in terms of how their percentage are as function of the same group of users, right? And that's on the next slide, Jason. Cool. So if you think about it that way, this is a much easier way to actually think about growth. Right? What you're kind of looking at is you want to reduce the users who are disengaged and get them to get more engaged. And as long as you move that histogram across, you've really actually sort of delivered users who will potentially convert, users who will potentially spend more, users who will interact more. And it doesn't get any more really simpler than that, right? It's not about whether it's paid customers. It's not necessarily about trial, pre-trial, post-trial. It's really about making sure that the activities and the value derivation, which is a function of engagement, is continually monitored and subsequently just shifted into what we consider best behavior. Now, when we try to put that into a model, we layer that with how AgriWebb views growth, which is on the next slide. So the way we look at growth is something quite simple in this sense, in that growth is basically a change over time, right? And what we add to that is that intended change in state, right? Which is we want the user to not just change, meaning change for the worse, but we want it to intentionally change them for the actual behavior that we're hoping for. And the primary function of a growth model, and especially the one that we run, is that it has to always, any methodologies that we use, any tactics, techniques, etc., that we employ, has to be reliable in that it's not what we call just a sheer one-time hack, and it's repeatable, meaning we know that when we execute it and push that lever, we can reliably expect a certain level of increment. And that two characteristics for us determines and has subsequently arrived in what we consider a very scalable growth model that we use. It definitely consists, it's very operational, and what that means is that we don't really do a lot of strategy, we don't draw a lot of decks, we just get stuff done. We consist of obviously marketing and advertising, and we wrap in the other revenue functions to enable them. So obviously there's the sales function, and subsequently the success function, which is something that we integrate with quite closely, and that is currently layered subsequently then with what we consider the data layer, which is just the underlying data that enables all these three divisions to then help us function at our peak, but also help influence user experience decisions and product sort of prioritization, feature prioritization, and areas to focus more or less on to sort of increase that engagement and value derivation from the product. So we look at our model, and we have frameworks across that model for different channels, online and offline activities. And this is both from an acquisition or a customer acquisition perspective, but also from a product usage perspective. We also think about it in terms of audience segments. So what we think of that is it's not just the generic sort of demographic or psychographic, but we look at it quite differently and say, it is about usage, size of operation, and so on and so forth. And think about that as a function of where we're looking to target and what period of time that we're looking to sort of activate those users. And different geolocations, obviously, this is segmented by the kind of not just like localized areas, but global areas as a function of as well. Now, the one key thing that we take into consideration when the growth model actually amends itself and tweaks the methodology and the way we function and what we do is the market variations. Now, this part is the variance between each market we choose to play in, and the more market localized stuff that we need to consider to tweak what we do in terms of the frameworks, right? So while we have a quite mature playbook in terms of what we need to do and how we do it, we will tweak that playbook based on the market variation column to ensure that we are aligned with the local market and how local producers and farmers and subsequently their peripheral audiences react and interact with our product. So do the next slide, please. Cool. Now, before I actually jump into the nitty-gritty, what I wanted to actually show you is the result. We've recently, obviously, been featured as one of the first ag-tech startups in Australia that has managed to scale quite rapidly in recent months. We have got an international investment of 14 million, and through that investment have also acquired a company based out of the UK. Interestingly enough, our churn rate, which is displayed here, is less than 0.5% overall. At one point, actually broke the metric calculator of one of our SaaS sort of like performance monitoring tools. So think of like any toolkit that monitors your billing performance and so on and so forth. When we had a call with the CEO that actually gave us feedback saying that we broke their LTV calculator because we had a series of months of negative churn. Which is one of the greatest sort of like signs that we are very, very much engaged with our customers, and our customers actually love us quite a lot. We also had quite a bit of productivity uplift with a lot of them, and we're obviously scaling that numbers in terms of 50 or 60 is what is publicly sort of announced, and we are comfortably obviously scaling much more rapidly these days. And across both geos and as well as within the geo-specific areas as well. Cool. Next slide. Now, one of the key learnings that I take away from this before that actually helped to drive that results is really the fundamental one core bullet point here, which is it's not necessarily about democratizing data. It's about building maturity, right? And this point is a very big and sort of major point that I'll cover as we walk through some of the product methodologies and dashboards that we've done before. But there is a crucial step that most companies skip when they actually build and decide to build sort of a data function, be it internally as a separate sort of unit or integrated with other units, where the need is to then immediately sort of like open it up to everyone, and that causes actually a little bit more harm than it gains. And this is one of our big learnings is how we manage that. Customer centricity It's not always a one size fits all. It's not always about looking at the customer and saying what works and what doesn't work and subsequently tweaking. One of the core things in this point in terms of learning is that you'd have to realize where your position is in the marketplace, be it if you are an early adopter or your marketplace maturity in and of itself is much younger, you can't usually apply a lot of the more mature rule sets and growth hacks, if you may, to actually scale your product. What you need to actually look at is how do you actually gather enough understanding about the market, about the interactions with the existing early adopters, and subsequently use that to create tests when you're looking to scale. So things that may have worked or may not have worked with early adopters may not necessarily apply in the scale or hypergrowth mode. And this one bullet point is really how we'll show you how we figure that out. Pick a channel or two and continue to iterate. What I mean by this actually is more often than not, when you're trying to focus on point two, you're trying to actually decide, look, this channel has actually led us to actually gain a ton of customers. It shows a good acquisition flow and so on and so forth. But the subsequent side of things, and I believe this is also it's kind of Charlie Munger way, if you may, of looking at it, is you've always got to also understand why the other channels is potentially not working. What parts of it were, failed, and what do you determine as a success failure criteria? And what we've actually realized, for instance, one of our early days was when the company was focused on early adopters, is that the strategy or sort of like channel or field marketing was considered not a primary channel because we could not, or the company at the time did not figure out or could not figure out how to really connect the dots between what is essentially an offline activity in our case to an actual digital usage and subsequently like enablement. And we've actually solved that problem, and we'll talk through how that works a little bit later. But the point being that when you believe, even if it's a gut feel, even if it's a data feel, you have to understand how to iterate and create continuously success failure iterations within that same channel to actually understand what is successful and what is failure as a whole. And the fourth and most crucial point that kind of like supersedes all of it at that point is always focus on the fundamentals. This is a data webinar, and we are all here to actually talk about data as a whole. But the most important thing to understand is that data does not actually dictate your growth strategy or your sort of scaling mechanisms. What data actually does is it helps decode what has worked or hasn't worked based on raw hard feedback, right? So always as a function, focus on the fundamentals of what growth is and what the data is supposed to actually enable, not actually look at the data as a like sort of a primary shining sort of like lever into, oh, this is how we need to make a decision because that's what the data says. And that's actually a weird way of looking at it. It has to be the other way around. Is if we are trying to test this, what does past data show us about the success or failure rate of something of this nature, right? And that's actually the way we look at it as well. Cool, next slide. Now, AgriWebb before Panoply and Chartio, so there's not too much to actually sort of delve here except to say that, we didn't actually have an easy way. We had an extremely talented product team, right? We had really good engineers who were really, really good at what they did. We have a solid product, which to any growth person is always a plus, because when your product is strong, you actually have much less of a barrier when you're looking at engagement, when you're looking at interaction, reactivations, etc. But the primary challenge was that there wasn't an active sort of like effort into unifying data across the product and the organizational view, right? Which is to say that from a business perspective, if they actually needed, sort of a business view of, how many trials per month and how many sales were converted based on those trials, and how much did we spend to acquire those trials and subsequently get those sales, and can we tell them by the plans that they came into so that we know how the most valuable customers are coming in versus not, and what that segmented CAC is. There was no real easy way for us to do that, and that the primary reason for that was that there wasn't an active effort in whether to create a single source of truth, or there wasn't actually a organizational data model, not because it was people it was just more of a time and prioritization kind of thing. Right? And I think we had an impromptu need to actually start setting this up. And the kudos to this was the Panoply and Chartio stack that I'll talk about in the next slide, which actually was the primary decision-making criteria for us to actually pick this stack. So, Jason, sorry, next slide. Now, we had a big prompt from the business in that we obviously were raising funds. We were needing to also have an easier way for us to continually generate a lot of metrics and review them over time, right? And that means that prompted effort or triggered effort is always going to be not as efficient. And so we needed a stack that was, one, quickly stood up, able to quickly stand up, and also it's more of a set and forget. Meaning, if we stand it up and we're able to actually connect it and get the data in the right order, it should just function automatically without us going back and reevaluating it, because we had to move quite fast into other areas of the business. And so that, in fact, our first MVP of the Panoply Chartio stack was stood up in less than 3 days. And that was the the couple of the dashboards that I'll cover later. And that was actually a combination of making sure that there was data cleansing, data standardization, and data blending across quite a different set of sources, payment system, accounting systems, and our product systems, to make sure that we could give a very comprehensive view. And the beauty of this stack was that it got us there really, really quickly, which is one of the reasons why we've stuck with it for quite a while. But the big decision that helped us as well, it wasn't just a quick shot stack. It was a stack that fit very well with our existing internal sort of product EA, which was very AWS centric. Panoply being a Redshift as a service with very easily integratable way of like working within our ecosystem was quite helpful there. One of the other things that we found that was also quite seamless was the fact that a lot of the pipeline vendors that we considered to actually port data into Panoply, for instance, which is like Stitch and Blender in this case, and Panoply's native connectors were, they were all Panoply ready. And I think that was also a big plus for us, where both Stitch and Blender recognized that they were actually ingesting data into Panoply, so they could actually tailor the data ingestion in a much more efficient and lenient manner, rather than us trying to actually configure a webhook and trying to actually get an API level call to organize data and then sort of an ETL in. So we were quite happy that we found the stack that, number one, enabled us to just sort of set and forget, but was very much aligned with that existing need of being able to set up an MVP in 3 days and have that still be completely aligned with the internal sort of like security measures and like product stack measures and so on. So and I think that sort of started the baseline of how we sort of grew the current sort of iteration of where Chartio and Panoply actually is, which we'll take you through a little bit later. But Jason, if you could go to the next slide, please. Now, from the analytics side, the core thing as we passed the MVP phase was we also needed a stack. So this was where, could we pick an easier sort of visualization tool that exists that was able to query, tables and so on and so forth? Yes. But we also needed a BI and visualization tool that had a low barrier to entry, but not from a data democratization, everybody jump on the platform side, but more so we needed a low barrier to entry for the people who were going to get the data to be more accurate, right? So we needed the engineering teams to be able to look at it, understand how the data model worked, quickly interrogate it to actually figure out where the gaps were and how we were solving for it, and immediately sort of pick up from there to get the data to go more accurately into whatever the charts that we were actually generating out of it, what are the insights we're generating out of it. So it was not necessarily for us at that time focused on making sure that everyone in the company had access. We had to get people who were sort of product or niche specialists or vertical specialists within the company to actually understand how to actually use this BI and visualization tool, low sort of pickup curve, quick results. And note that this process actually was quite a while. So both Panoply and Chartio worked with us for a 6 months period to actually match the pricing to our maturity curve, where we had an initial period of MVP to sort of like getting to maturity curve, that they were more, they were very lenient towards and very flexible with us because of the kind of end goal that we were looking to get to. And I think that really helped us scale very quickly from a data culture perspective, and it helped us actually trust Panoply and Chartio as vendors because they were really on it with us. In fact, there were multiple times, in fact, from the Chartio side even, that we had senior sort of like expert product and data engineers speaking to us and giving us advice on stack management and how we should actually think about data optimization in how do we even decide on whether we should go with a Redshift model and or how do we leverage Panoply for its advantages. And that to us as a vendor who was actually reviewing both of these tools separately at the time really helped us actually understand why they fit together really, really well. From a maturity curve perspective. And so that gave us, that sort of the analytics level sort of check marks that we need to tick very, very quickly from the org. Cool. Next slide, please. Cool. So now from a AgriWebb after Panoply bit, which is partially why you're here, but not all the way why you're here, is that look, it's all the data these days are much more available, readily available, and easily consumable. And our board actually looks at the dashboards on a daily basis, the pertinent dashboards, all the way down to our intern who's actually trying to understand product engagement, actually reviews it as and when. The advantage of having an easy to use sort of system and platform is that a data culture is much more prevalent and easy to build. Everybody is much more focused on, how do we score and grade better? How do we review the funnel and sort of pit stops better? How do we actually create a performance model and adopt a performance model that is much more metric driven, because it's much easier for us to sort of like decode what that culture is, how it looks like as a whole, and how am I as a person, or how am I as a division performing as a function of that whole funnel. And so it's much easier for us now to have that culture much built out, and our exco and our management teams make it have a significantly higher level of confidence when they're trying to make and propose tests, or even if they have to make a decision or a call, because it's easy for us to really quickly come up with the necessary information or details that they need when they're reviewing any of this sort of initiatives across the company. And that's primarily because of the fact that we're able to just piece together quite multiple different pieces of the puzzle for an easy to access, sort of easy to consume view. Cool. So next slide. Now, I think what we'll do, and this is really sort of the more interesting part of how we actually thought about it. What you'll see next is a portion of some of our dashboards. It's not all of it. The clause here and the administrative clause here is that all the data you see is, basically dummy data. We've created the dashboards and sort of created clones of it, but have fed it dummy data. But I'll actually explain some easy ways for us to actually think about why the framework of the dashboard is more important and not necessarily what it's actually showing you on screen. So even if you, so the first one that we'll walk through is the one that actually created the change and was the MVP that we stood up in less than 3 days. And I mean from no data unification to visualized dashboard, which is self-governing. This is the executive dashboard. Again, all dummy data, which is currently viewed, and updated on a every 15-minute interval. That is now going directly to the board and to every other stakeholder in the company. This view, one snapshot, gives us a very quick understanding of the health of the company, the current performance of the teams involved in sort of like the acquisition or the customer acquisition side. And the overall, when we look at it, we start looking at an easy way for us to assess the overall MRR, but the easy way for us to assess our LTV to CAC, and whether that plays into the 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 or multiple to 1 ratio for the LTV to CAC sort of glance that usual SaaS company is particularly focused on. We try to keep at the very minimum 3.1 to 1. We actually have genuinely outperformed that for most months. And we have, again, the churn rate, which is again one of the lowest in the world and continues to get low over time. Now, the interesting thing over here is, this dashboard as a whole is not as interesting from a data and analyst perspective, but when you look at it from an executive perspective, this one snapshot gives you a very quick understanding of where the company is at from just a health perspective. And that was really the goal of this dashboard and this view. So now to go to the fun stuff, which is the other side, this is the initial or the top end of the funnel. We classify it as the prospects. This is not our only dashboard, but it's one of the few. This is how we actually look at prospects. A simple example I'll explain here is we try to look at how many prospects actually fall into the funnel and complete the whole, visitor to trial funnel and in the first instance, and which channels actually derive and push them across the line. What is the regional distribution of those? And again, this is all from a calendaral perspective. So we are able to actually look at how campaigns have changed the percentage of first instance and whether they've increased or decreased over time. And we look at how region saturation functions as a view of that. That, in addition to that, what it also gives us is how dependent we are on the delivery network. So if it's a paid network, for instance, that 17% as an example there, as a dummy data there example, you look at the network dependence and say which network actually helped deliver that percentage of the 75% that actually is completing it on the first instance, and which network helped deliver the 17%, for instance. How many of those were paid versus non-paid? How many of those had a distribution that was display versus not? And really what we look at is to quickly understand what convinced that user, whether we should continue to sort of like spend customer acquisition costs on areas that are digital, paid, digital remarketing, digital, sort of like search, if you may, or field marketing as an example. And that gives us that ability to really quickly dive in from a marketer's point of view. Once we have this understanding, we also zoom out and look at it differently in the next slide and look at how the prospect behaves. So we try to zoom out. This is the sort of macro level of the previous slide where we kind of look at the entire prospect interval within a date range or a specified date range and figure out what the spread from a standard deviation perspective is from them getting into as a visitor and interacting with us to actually converting into a prospect and subsequently starting a trial. And what that means is that we are able to look at all the channels, time of days, obviously, for people who visit us and subsequently actually start a trial, and how that differs, which you can see at the bottom over there, in the bottom right-hand corner, because you can see how the heat map changes, where more often than not, what we realize is this one group actually shows us that 90% of the users that deal with us actually who then subsequently actually start a trial actually interact with us in a very different time and consume content or basically look up information about us in a very early stage, but then actually decide to start a trial at a much later point in the day for them, or towards the evening. And what this generally equates to is that they genuinely have work, lunch hours, etc., and so on and so forth. So we started to tailor a lot of our messaging and outreach based on this time of day and through the adequate channel that they're actually interacting with based on time of day, so that we know how to reach them in the most personal, customizable way that's suited to them based on what we're trying to do, whether it's, hey, this is what you need to know versus start your trial now. Next slide, please. And this is a channel specific. This is an example of the AdWords one. This is a macro view, and obviously, there's always micro views, but the macro view gives us a very quick sort of like spread of how we look at all our campaigns and which campaigns have contributed or consumed. So if you think of spend, which is not here, but it's on the lower end of that spectrum, versus impressions and clicks, which campaign actually delivers and or consumes most of the spend and or delivers most of the impressions and or clicks. And we're able to look at that as a function of default sort of like hierarchical time series, which is like 12 weeks, 12 months, and 14 days, which is how we actually assess mid-term, short-term, and sort of like longer-term campaigns to see how behavior has changed over time. We obviously have this exact view in what we call a ping pong, which is a tit for tat, where we can compare similar campaigns for different kind of like regions and actually look at the graphs hand in hand and compare to each other to see how they have actually performed from a consumption perspective and driving visitors to the website, driving clicks, and so on and so forth. Now, next slide, please. The funnel performance. Now, this is actually where a lot of the strength of Panoply and Chartio's sort of integration comes into play. We actually look at the sales funnel. We obviously use Salesforce as a primary CRM, but the core thing here is to look at it from a person perspective. So each graph here is obviously, as usual, clickable and derivable from each other. So the moment you click on a specific, series, time, person, name, or lead channel, the entire sort of dashboard filters itself out to give you the data that's relevant to that specific selected segment. And what this gives our team the ability to do is to be able to zoom and look at performance, but also channel performance as a function of the same funnel, right? So if you're looking at channel performance of leads that were created from field marketing, that was addressed by the whole team, who converts them better versus not. And this is a view that something like Salesforce is not easily reproducible within the same sort of like environment there. And so we use this and merge it with a few other systems that we have to produce this result and this graph. And what's always interesting here is to look at the variation between how the sources of the sessions come into play and how they actually convert into trials. And what you'll notice over here is what's always a primary source for the www at the bottom, which is the bottom left pie charts, two pie charts down there. The difference between the lead sources, and I've intentionally not blurred out the last bit, just to give you a quick indication of how that works, is that we look at different sources for different parts of the funnel and how they actually perform and deliver. And what that actually gives us is the ability for us to look at the blended CAC, which is on the bottom right, and say, if we are actually spending this much over this period of time, what's our recovery period when we think about it from an annual sort of like recurring revenue perspective, and which sources actually help derive that and over what window. And that's really how we think about that conversion rate and how we think about channel specific conversion rate as a function, not purely of the overall funnel, but as part of each part of the funnel. And so we look at it as micro conversions and not just macro conversions as a whole. So the data here gives us that ability to slice and dice dynamically across all of that. And that's what keeps it quite interesting for us when we're looking at it from a sales and performance perspective. Next slide, please. Sorry, next one. Oh, cool, thank you. And similarly, we look at this from the product side as well, and we look at the ability for us to create cohorts based on overall and median by all of those like breakdowns. So we're now able to look at how a specific selected cohort performs based on the overall cohort that is related to them. So we can narrow down by a country and have median graphs and cohort graphs generated. Again, this is all Divi data, so it might not look as interesting as you'd like, but what we like to do is look at where users interact with us and what the selected segment is interacting with us and how their behavior is compared to a similar or the overall segment of users. And what this means is that we try to narrow down each of this and look at what are the right things, what are the right communication messages, what are the right ways that we have hit them, we've actually interacted with them, whether it's in ad or outside the ad, which teams have gone through the process, what are the actual information onloads that they have taken, and how does that actually differ compared to the main, right? And what this gives us is an ability for us to actually micro focus on not just a channel, but the actual portions of a channel, the actual activities of a channel, to actually increase or decrease any portions of that, because the data has actually shown that has either increased or decreased medians, on the overall for a specific segment. And so this is how we look at not just the end-to-end, which is the simpler way of looking at it, but we think about our customer experience comprehensively. And when we get feedback, we try to understand, what is top of mind, which was demonstrated in the sales dashboard earlier, and what is the data actually showing that is, sort of like in an alternate to the top of mind that they are mentioning over the calls. And what this gives us is that ability for us to think about where we want users to go, which specific segment that we're actually running, sort of campaigns on, and how they actually sort of interact worse or better off with the product, which is how we actually scale that original slide, which is how do we think about growth? We think about growth by picking a cohort and moving the behavior of that cohort to derive more value from us as quickly as they can. And so this is the simpler way we look at product. And Jason, is there another slide? I believe there's one more. Yes, perfect. And so this is the last one, which is the churn side. And what this is an ability to actually give us a one-stop view and analysis on churn, looking at the churn users. But again, when we look at users, the core thing, and actually one of the greatest things that Panoply has really helped us do is create views that prevent any data leakage. We are very conscious of our customers' data. We don't like to actually sort of like collect it or look at it as a whole. And what we do is we have the ability for us to pick anonymous segments and look at how that segments behave from a timeline perspective, which is on the left, and specific activities, such as in our case, mob movement, if they're actually moving a specific animal between paddocks, which in the app, which is a very fundamental core sort of primary activity when they're doing it. How many times have they done that as a function of the entire timeline? And this gives us the ability to very quickly assess what we consider churn risk, as opposed to when we're looking at it from the overall median of where everyone else is. So churn risk is very quickly identified. It gives the customer success team an ability for them to zoom in and figure out how they can actually fix or target or reactivate or re-engage a specific segment. These are the specific activities that segment as a whole has done, and when they have started and when they have stopped, and how that functions as a baseline compared to the median. So the good thing about this from a single shot view is that the success team has the ability to then interact in a very clear, specific manner, even by just analyzing the timelines and realizing, oh, great, look, so we've realized that this person is disengaged because they've not actually done a core feature for X period of time compared to today. And that's equally important, because now we can actually interact with them and say, look, we're not just focused on always the best customers, we're focused on the customers that are not deriving value continually, which is the other parts of that initial growth cohort that are demonstrated, and allows them to fix that and reduce that percentage of users in that same cohort that is getting disengaged, even though they were very engaged in the beginning. So this is a quick way of our churn analysis, and that's kind of the way we've actually brought this together. A lot of this data obviously requires quite a heavy amount of data blending, but the beauty of this kind of a dashboard, and especially for the farm success team, is that it gives a very visual way for them to actually interact with complex things that for them is complex, like SQL queries and so on and so forth, by leveraging some of the existing sort of plays within the platform. Like Chartio enables them to do a drag and drop function that quickly enables them to really generate a lot of these information, and gives us the ability to give them filters that quickly allows them to look at the segments and analyze them with just click interactions. And this is kind of where that's sort of the strength of this combined stack comes in, and has enabled us to deliver the growth that we started this webinar with, which is a large sort of fundraising round, acquisitions, and a churn rate that is one of the lowest in the world for a B2B SaaS business. Cool. And I think that's pretty much my last slide, if I'm not mistaken. Turning this back to Jason.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Brian. There's so much to unpack here. In case you are interested in trying out Panoply and Chartio, there is a free trial. Go over to panoply.io to get started. And then also there is a trial of Chartio that you can get going so that you can get going with as well. So again, you're going to get all your data sources aggregated. They're easily queryable and connected to Chartio in just minutes. One nice thing is that both trials are not limited editions. They are the full versions of our respective offerings. So if you want to try it, bring in some data, visualize it in Chartio, it is all there for you to give a try. So we're going to do questions and answers now. So if you have questions for the panel, and I imagine most of the questions are going to be for Brian, and if you have anything for Aaron at Chartio or Skylar and Jason at Panoply, feel free to use that questions facility inside GoToWebinar. We do have one question that has been posed to us already, and then we have some others that have come in through email and other means. So let's go ahead and dig into some of the questions. One question is for Brian. The first one is, how has having clarity into your data impacted decisions and revenue channels within your growth and sales team?
I think the quick answer to that is it tells us what to do when, and if something is not working, how serious is it to fix, right? And I think that's probably where we've learned and leveraged the most. The insights, like any platform, you get to look, learn, and sort of like understand. Oh, this has worked or this hasn't worked. But I think what the data and the blended view has given us is the ability to sort of understand prioritization as a function of that view, and understand which part of it, especially if you're hyper growth or you're looking to test lots of channels very rapidly, which part of it or which set of activities that you need to actually focus on, and which one you shouldn't be focusing on at this point.
Okay. And then how do the visualizations and insights gathered by your team typically get presented and shared with your leadership team?
So the leadership team has, most of the leadership team has a direct login to the dashboards. Where required, we do have specific querying that we bring out if there's something that is already non-existent. More often than not, the leadership team, unless they're actually divisional leaderships where they're actually curious on what's actually going on, we tend to give them a more macro sort of executive view on how the performance is, and again, provide them with the prioritization criteria of, okay, what are the channels that we need to double down in the next 3 months? And that, to answer those kind of questions, this gives us that ability to actually really quickly present that, not necessarily in a sort of an external mode, but by just opening up a dashboard and displaying it.
Nice. We have a question.
Sorry to interrupt.
Please.
I just want to add on to what Brian said there. I think one of the things Brian highlighted early on with I believe the executive dashboard, I think it was a great example of setting up that high-level dashboard where you can highlight the items that need to be highlighted to your executive team, while also providing the opportunity to drill down into additional dashboards if necessary. So if you think about it from a car dashboard point of view, you don't need all the information at all times. However, you do want to know if something needs to be highlighted or if something needs attention. So by setting up that formatting as you did on that dashboard, I think it was a great way of drawing attention to the right things at the right time, and then providing them the resources to kind of drill down further into the actual detail of what makes up, whatever metric that was.
Perfect.
Yep, 100%.
I have a question for Brian. If someone is at a SaaS company and just starting out with their analytics stack and data collection, where should they start?
Oh, good question, actually. I think start by actually not picking the technologies first, despite with us being on a technology webinar. I think the goal is to actually first understand who's going to consume anything that you're going to be doing from an analytics perspective. If you are the primary client, ask yourself what is the questions you're looking to answer, and always start at that. The common mistake is to actually figure out the solution before the problem statement is actually sort of nailed down. So sit down with the rest, identify the right stakeholders, talk to them, and ask them, what are the questions you want answered? And that's actually a good baseline to start and say, how do I find the answers to this question? And you'll pick your stack and subsequently your technology and your visualization and your reporting dashboards and so on. The design of that whole dashboard, the experience of the whole dashboard comes back down to that same initial question, which is, what are you trying to answer? For who?
Wrong. By all the things. By all the things. That's the answer. Kidding. Question for Skylar. Why would you need to connect to Redshift as a service if you are already using Panoply?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's actually one that we get quite a bit. So if you didn't catch this earlier in the presentation, so Panoply is essentially is a Redshift as a service offering. We have a lot of augmentations that we provide to Redshift, but ultimately our infrastructure, at least for the time being, is Redshift. I'd say there's maybe 3 main reasons that someone would be connecting in Redshift data. So first of all, Panoply offers native ETL connectors. So if you wanted to mix your Redshift data with data from other sources, you would perhaps port Redshift as well as all of those other sources into Panoply hosted Redshift, at which point you could do analysis on everything in one central source of truth. Another thing that frankly happens is, Panoply is a fully managed version of Redshift, and we run into organizations that are tired of the cost and time required to manage it themselves. So they'll want to move over to Panoply hosted Redshift as a way to alleviate some of those struggles. And then also, the last point I'd make is Panoply, we do augment some of the things that Redshift has built. So Jason was getting into AQM, automatic query materialization, as well as view materialization. So some of those performance enhancements can definitely be another reason that you would see that occur.
Yep. And if I'll add on to that actually a little bit, in that, number one, 100%, I think that the core thing for us, especially from an AgriWebb perspective, was that we are not a DevOps company, we're not a Redshift sort of database admin company. We did not want to maintain our entire sort of like database stack. We needed something that was scalable, but scalable based on our needs, which was one of the reasons why Panoply differs compared to actually maintaining your own stack. And I personally have to say that the materialized view sort of caching mechanisms that was deployed by Panoply, and the other side of things, which is something that we constantly have chats on with the team at Panoply, is the ability for them to actually go in and automatically help optimize some of the way we're doing what we're doing, while delivering the same sort of like experience and functionality, is something that we personally have held in really high regard. Deploying features such as the credentials part that we required, or security or access levels, that the way we were hoping for, is also something that was, one, acted on very, very quickly and promptly, and we were kept on the loop all throughout that as well. So that's a big plus for us as a company who is very technologically focused, but not wanting to actually maintain things beyond our existing sort of product infrastructure.
Nice. Thank you both. Question for Brian. What has the process of, quote, maturization, in quote, butchering this. What has been the process of maturization as opposed to data democratization?
What's the process of maturization versus data democratization?
Yeah.
Is that the question? Okay.
I guess, how have you matured in addition to helping spread data awareness?
I think it's twofold. Number one, the maturity curve for data is not generally about mass adoption, right? I think the mass adoption is a function of the culture of data. I think the data maturity curve for us is not having data in one place, having data in one place and understanding why it's not answering the questions, then having it answer the questions, subsequently helping us understand what questions weren't asked and how do we find the answers to that, and subsequently then actually giving us the ability to go find that out ourselves. Now, where the data culture comes into play from this maturity curve, or data maturity curve, is that a user that is at the start of this is the same user who is hungry but has looked at all the changes that's coming through, and now what's actually building out with them is, one, awareness of what's actually going on from a data perspective, from an insights perspective, but two, subsequently, is the confidence of actually understanding, hey, I'm doing something, or I'm trying to do something, and here's something, here's the data that's showing me that either I'm doing it right, or I need to focus on a certain area more, or the other side of it is, I don't have all the answers right now, but I have some answers, which gives me much more confidence than nothing at all. Right, and so I think that actually, I'm sure all of us here on the webinar have been to a boardroom meeting or whatever, not in your own companies, but even in their past lives, where everybody comes up, they'll pull their own Excel sheets, and someone will say, hey, that number doesn't match mine, right? And I think that is really what you prevent. And the moment that happens, if you're a junior analyst, for instance, your confidence level dives really quickly. If you're a senior executive and you're talking to someone else that, for instance, your board, and the board says, no, 2 days ago I saw a different number from, insert other person, that destroys your confidence on the spot, right? And so I think that's kind of the variance, that there is maturity curves in two angles here. one is a cultural maturity curve to data, and one is the data curve itself.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Like I said earlier, there's a lot to unpack here, and we want to thank everyone for their time. We are up on our time. I do want to thank Brian and Skylar and Aaron. I appreciate your time. If you have a colleague who would love to see or hear this information, we are going to be making the recording available after the fact, and you'll be emailed with the recording. So if you want to share or have them register, they can view the recording. So again, thank you, gentlemen, for your time. I appreciate it, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.